I never imagined that a life that once felt so full could turn into one of endless dissatisfaction and pain. My name is Karen, and this is the story of how I came to realize that happiness isn't something you can hold onto when it's slipping through your fingers. I'm 48 years old, working as an administrative assistant in a small office here in Houston, Texas. I love my job, but it's never been enough to shield me from the turbulence of my home life. My husband, Mike, who is 3 years older than me, used to be a confident man, but a recent demotion at work has turned him into a shadow of his former self. He's now a man who takes his frustrations out on the people he loves the most, me and our teenage daughter, Sarah. Mike's anger has been a constant presence in our home for months now. I often find myself walking on eggshells, trying to avoid any situation that might set him off. His temper can flare up over the smallest things, but what cuts the deepest are his harsh words about my weight. "Why can't you just control yourself?" he'll snap. "You've put on so much weight, Karen. It's embarrassing." These words are like daggers. I try to ignore them, hoping that he'll see how hard I'm working to maintain a sense of normalcy despite his attacks. I work hard, juggle responsibilities at home, and try to keep our family life as stable as possible. But every time he opens his mouth to criticize me, it feels like the ground beneath me shifts just a little more. Adding to the tension is my mother-in-law, Helen. At 74, she's still very much a part of our daily lives. She lives with us, and her presence is a constant reminder of my inadequacies. Helen has her own way of making me feel like a failure, often wrapped in what she pretends is concern for my well-being. "Karen, are you really going to have that second serving?" she'll ask, her voice laced with a patronizing edge. "You know, you should be more mindful of what you eat." These comments come from a place of judgment rather than genuine concern. Helen's disapproval is always thinly veiled, and it only adds to the suffocating atmosphere in our home. Mike and Helen seem to be in agreement on one thing: I'm the problem. My daughter, Sarah, is the one bright spot in my life. At 16, she's perceptive and compassionate, and she can see through the pretense. She tries to stand up for me whenever she can, but it's hard for her to go against both her father and grandmother. She's a high school sophomore, and despite the challenges at home, she's managed to excel academically and maintain her kind-hearted nature. One evening, after another exhausting day at work and dealing with Mike's latest round of criticism, I came home to find Helen's critical gaze already waiting for me. The stress was mounting, but I tried to keep my composure. Dinner was supposed to be a time of normalcy, but it felt more like a battleground. Mike had come home late, which was unusual. He walked in with a smirk on his face, holding a bottle of wine spritzer. "I thought we'd celebrate making it through another day," he said, his tone oddly cheerful. I didn't think much of it at the time. We sat down at the dinner table, and as usual, Mike and Helen began their verbal jabs. My plate was filled with what I assumed was a standard dinner, but the way they watched me eat made me feel uneasy. As I took a sip of my wine spritzer, something didn't taste right. There was an odd, spicy aftertaste that lingered unpleasantly. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling only grew stronger. I looked over at Helen, who was sipping from her glass of wine as well. A knot tightened in my stomach. Something was off, but I couldn't pinpoint it. My heart raced as I watched Helen take another sip. I could see her face flush, her eyes widening in surprise. She started coughing, her discomfort evident. The spicy taste in my own drink now felt like it was setting my mouth on fire. "Are you all right, Helen?" I asked, trying to sound concerned. Helen's response was choked and unintelligible. Mike, however, looked on with a mixture of amusement and annoyance. It wasn't until Helen's coughing turned into a full-blown gagging fit that Mike finally made a move. "What did you do to the drink, Mike?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. Mike shrugged, a look of feigned innocence on his face. Just thought I'd spice things up a bit. Didn't think it would be such a big deal. I knew then that this wasn't just a prank. It was a deliberate act of cruelty, a final push in the long line of abuses I had endured. The realization hit me hard. Sarah had been watching from the sidelines, her face a mask of shock and disappointment. Her support was my only comfort, but even that felt fragile in the face of Mike's increasing hostility. That night, I lay awake in bed, my mind racing. The spicy drink incident was the last straw. I needed to make a change for the sake of my own sanity and Sarah's well-being. But I didn't know how or where to begin. As I listened to the quiet, my thoughts were filled with the weight of what lay ahead. I needed to find the strength to confront this toxic environment. I needed to make a decision that would change our lives forever. And though I was scared, I knew I couldn't let fear keep me trapped in this cycle any longer. The next few days were a blur of tension and uncertainty. I was haunted by the memory of that evening, Mike's cruel prank, Helen's choking fit, and the heavy silence that followed. It was clear to me now. Our home was no longer a sanctuary but a battlefield where I was constantly under attack. I knew I couldn't let this go on any longer. The humiliation and emotional abuse had been building up for far too long. As I looked around our house, it felt more like a prison than a home. Every corner seemed to whisper reminders of the resentment and anger that festered within its walls. Sarah had been a beacon of support through all this, but even she was starting to feel the strain. I could see it in her eyes, the way she flinched at every raised voice and tensed whenever Mike was around. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from the harsh reality of our situation, but I wasn't sure how. One afternoon, after dropping Sarah off at school, I found myself sitting at my desk, the paperwork in front of me feeling like a mountain I couldn't climb. My mind was preoccupied with thoughts of escape. I had been quietly planning my exit, researching my options, and trying to figure out how to make a clean break. My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. It was Sarah, calling from school. Her voice was strained, and I could tell she was upset. "Mom, can you come to school? I need to talk to you," she said, her voice cracking. I hurried to the school, my heart pounding with worry. When I arrived, Sarah was waiting for me by the front office. Her face was pale, and she looked like she had been crying. I wrapped my arms around her, trying to offer comfort. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice full of concern. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes filled with determination. "I overheard something today. Some kids were talking about how Mike is acting at home. They know he's been demoted and how it's been affecting all of us. I didn't want to say anything, but it's clear that everyone at school knows what's going on." I felt a surge of shame and anger. It was one thing to deal with our issues behind closed doors, but the thought of others knowing our struggles made me feel exposed and vulnerable. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I never wanted you to be in this position." She shook her head, her expression firm. "Mom, it's not your fault. You've done everything you can. I just want you to know that I'm here for you. And I'm not going to let them get away with this." Her words were a balm to my frayed nerves. It was clear that Sarah's support was unwavering, and it gave me the strength to keep going. We talked for a while, and I could see the resolve in her eyes. She was ready to fight back, and so was I. Later that evening, as we sat down for dinner, the atmosphere was thick with unease. Mike was still trying to act normal, but his efforts felt forced. Helen was unusually quiet, perhaps still embarrassed by the incident with the spiked drink. Mike finally broke the silence, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "So, Karen, have you decided how you're going to handle your little problem? Or are you just going to keep avoiding it?" I looked him in the eye, refusing to be intimidated. "I've decided that I can't live like this anymore. I've been planning to make some changes, and I'm going to start by standing up for myself." Mike's face darkened, and Helen's eyes widened in surprise. I could feel the weight of their judgment, but I stood my ground. I had made up my mind, and there was no turning back. That night, as I lay in bed, I prepared myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. I had gathered evidence of Mike's abusive behavior and Helen's unkindness, preparing to present it to Mike as part of our separation process. I was ready to fight for a future where Sarah and I could be free from this toxic environment. The realization hit me. I was no longer a passive participant in my own life. I was taking control, and that was a powerful feeling. I had to stay strong for Sarah and for myself. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. The days that followed were tense. Every morning, I woke up with a mixture of dread and determination. I knew that things had to change, but I also knew that facing Mike and Helen would be difficult. The atmosphere in our home was thick with unspoken anger, and I could feel the pressure building. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, I could sense that something was off. Mike's mood was darker than usual, and Helen seemed unusually quiet, as if she was bracing for something. I had no idea what was coming, but I knew that tonight could be the night when everything came to a head. Mike was unusually quiet as well, only breaking the silence to make snide remarks about my cooking. His comments were thinly veiled attacks, designed to provoke me. I kept my responses short, trying to maintain my composure. As the meal progressed, Mike suddenly announced, "I thought we could have a little celebration tonight. I made a special drink for everyone." He reached for a bottle of wine spritzer from the fridge and poured generous amounts into glasses. The scent of the drink was faintly spicy, but I didn't think much of it. I was preoccupied with the growing tension between us. Helen, who had been mostly silent, took her glass and sipped it without comment. I noticed her wince slightly, but I assumed it was just the spiciness of the drink. We continued eating, trying to make small talk despite the strained atmosphere. As Helen started coughing and gasping for air, I felt a wave of panic. Her face turned red, and she struggled to speak. It was clear that something was terribly wrong. "Helen, are you okay?" I asked, my voice filled with concern. Helen could barely respond, but I saw the look of realization in her eyes. She knew that the drink was to blame, just as I had begun to suspect. Mike's face was a mask of feigned innocence, but I could see the glint of satisfaction in his eyes. In the chaos that followed, I quickly switched my drink with Helen's when she wasn't looking. The spicy concoction had been intended for me, but it seemed that Mike's plan had backfired. Helen's distress led to a dramatic scene. The dinner ended abruptly as she was rushed to the hospital, leaving Mike and me alone in the house. The silence that followed was heavy with unresolved tension and unspoken accusations. Once the house was empty, I took the opportunity to confront Mike. I was shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "Mike, this has to stop. I've had enough of your cruel games and Helen's harsh comments. I can't live like this anymore." Mike's reaction was defensive and angry. "You're just overreacting, Karen. It was a harmless prank. You always blow things out of proportion." His dismissive attitude was the last straw. I had reached the breaking point. I knew I had to act, not just for my own sake but for Sarah's as well. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks, gathering evidence of Mike's behavior and preparing divorce papers. The next morning, as Sarah and I prepared for the day, I took a deep breath and handed her the divorce papers. Her eyes widened in shock, but I could see the relief behind her concern. "Mom, is this really happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound as reassuring as possible. "It's time for us to move on. We need to get out of this toxic environment and start fresh." Sarah hugged me tightly, and I could feel her support bolstering my resolve. We began making plans to move to my parents' house, where we would find the stability and care we desperately needed. That evening, I finally told Mike about our decision. His reaction was one of anger and disbelief, but I stood firm. I'm leaving, Mike. I can't be part of this anymore. I've filed for divorce, and there's nothing you can do to change my mind. Mike's face turned a dark shade of red, and he stormed out of the room. The house was filled with a sense of finality. The decision was made, and there was no turning back. As Sarah and I packed our things, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. It was a new beginning, but it was also a daunting change. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew that leaving Mike and Helen behind was the only way to find peace and happiness. The move to my parents' house was a huge relief. Their home in Houston was a world away from the chaos and toxicity of my old life. As soon as we arrived, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. My parents welcomed us with open arms, and the warmth of their support was a stark contrast to the coldness we had left behind. My mom and dad were understanding and attentive. They did their best to make Sarah and me feel at home, providing a safe space where we could begin to heal. My dad, always the practical one, helped us settle in, while my mom took charge of making sure we had everything we needed. I finalized the divorce from Mike within a few weeks. The legal process was draining, but having my parents and Sarah by my side made it bearable. Mike continued to struggle both professionally and personally. He was left behind with Helen, who, despite reaching out to us occasionally, was now facing the reality of her actions. I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice in the way things unfolded, though I remained focused on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. The days in my parents' house were filled with a new kind of routine. I began to rebuild my life from scratch. I had to find a new job, and thankfully, my previous employer reached out with an offer to return. It was comforting to know that my professional life could offer some stability, especially after everything I had been through. One unexpected and positive turn of events was meeting a new, understanding person in my life. My boss, who had always been kind and supportive, expressed a deeper interest in me. His name was David, and he was different from anyone I had known before. He respected my efforts and saw me for who I truly was, someone deserving of kindness and love. David and I started seeing each other outside of work, and our relationship grew steadily. He was patient and understanding, offering me a safe space to share my experiences without judgment. With him, I felt a genuine connection and a sense of hope for the future. Sarah, too, was adjusting well to our new life. She thrived in the supportive environment of my parents' home and did well in her studies. Her resilience and courage were inspiring, and I was proud of the young woman she was becoming. We spent a lot of quality time together, doing things that made us both happy and slowly rebuilding our lives. Despite the new beginnings, there were occasional moments of doubt and fear about the future. It was natural to worry about what lay ahead, but I learned to embrace these feelings as part of the healing process. With the support of my parents and David, I found strength in focusing on the present and planning for a brighter future. Helen's attempts to reach out continued, but I remained firm in my decision to keep my distance. Reconnecting with the past would only bring back the pain I had worked so hard to overcome. My priority was to protect my well-being and that of my daughter. As time went on, the scars from my previous life began to heal. I was no longer the woman who had endured emotional abuse and felt trapped. I was stronger, more self-assured, and ready to embrace a new chapter. My relationship with David grew deeper, and we began to discuss our future together with optimism. The journey had been long and arduous, but it led me to a place where I could finally find happiness and peace. I realized that resilience wasn't just about surviving the difficult times, but also about having the strength to rebuild and move forward. Looking back, I understood the importance of self-respect and support systems. They had been my pillars of strength, helping me to stand tall and make the decisions that changed my life for the better. My story was a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of knowing one's worth. As I closed this chapter of my life, I felt a renewed sense of hope and a readiness to face whatever came next. With Sarah by my side and a future filled with promise, I embraced the journey ahead with confidence and optimism. My life had transformed, and I was finally on the path to finding true happiness and fulfillment. Hello, my name is Rebecca, and I'm 32 years old. I never thought I'd see the day when my world would turn upside down in the blink of an eye. It all started one evening during a family dinner at our home in Dallas. The dining room was filled with laughter and chatter as everyone enjoyed the meal. I sat at the table, quietly picking at my food, feeling like something was off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. My husband, Daniel, who is 35, seemed unusually confident that night. He had a smug grin on his face that made me uneasy. As the dinner progressed, he suddenly tapped his glass with a spoon, silencing the room. "I have an announcement to make," he said, his voice loud and clear. Everyone turned to him, their eyes filled with curiosity. "I've decided to get remarried," Daniel declared, smiling as if he'd just shared the most wonderful news. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. Remarried? I was sitting right there, his wife of 6 years, listening to him announce such a thing without any shame. The room erupted into murmurs, and then, to my utter shock, his family began congratulating him. My heart pounded as anger and humiliation surged through me. How could they support something so outrageous? I pushed my chair back and stood up, my voice trembling as I shouted, "Are you all serious? You're celebrating this?" Daniel turned to me, his smug smile unshaken. "Sit down, Rebecca," he said coldly, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. But I wasn't about to back down. "No, I won't sit down," I replied, my voice firm now. "You're making a fool of me in front of everyone. You'll regret this a lot, Daniel. Mark my words." He laughed, a cruel, dismissive laugh that made my blood boil. Without another word, he grabbed my arm, dragging me toward the door as I struggled to break free. His family watched in silence, not one of them standing up for me. As he shoved me out of the house, I turned back and said, "You'll regret this more than you can imagine." His laughter echoed behind the closed door, leaving me alone on the doorstep in the cool night air. That night, I vowed to myself that I wouldn't let this humiliation define me. Daniel thought he had won, but he had no idea what was coming next. The night felt endless as I sat in my car outside the house. I couldn't believe what had just happened. My mind raced with thoughts of betrayal and anger. But amid the chaos in my heart, one thing became clear. I needed to take control of my life. Daniel's smug face kept flashing in my mind, and I knew I couldn't let him walk away from this unscathed. I drove to my friend Amanda's house, a small but cozy place where I knew I'd find comfort and understanding. Amanda, 34, had been my best friend since college. When I told her everything that had happened, she didn't try to sugarcoat anything. "Rebecca, you deserve better," she said, handing me a cup of tea. "If Daniel thinks he can throw you out and humiliate you like that, he's got another thing coming." Her words fueled the fire inside me. Amanda and I stayed up late, planning my next steps. I wasn't just going to sit back and let Daniel and his family get away with what they'd done. The next morning, I woke up early, ready to set my plan into motion. Meanwhile, back at the house, Daniel rolled out of bed, yawning and stretching as if it were just another day. He had no idea what awaited him. When he went downstairs, expecting breakfast or the usual comforts, he was met with an eerie silence. Something was missing. His expensive car?
Gone.
The keys?
Missing.
The house staff? Absent. Confused, he started looking around, only to find an envelope sitting on the kitchen counter with his name on it. Inside was a single piece of paper. "Dear Daniel, welcome to the beginning of your regret. You'll learn today that arrogance has a price. Rebecca." He didn't laugh this time. Instead, he felt the first pang of worry creep in. He checked his phone, expecting to call someone to sort this out, but his bank app showed the first shocking surprise. His joint accounts were frozen. Meanwhile, I sat in Amanda's living room, sipping coffee and watching my phone light up with messages and missed calls from Daniel. Each vibration felt like a small victory. He was finally beginning to understand the weight of my words. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Amanda asked, watching me with a mix of admiration and concern. "I'm more than ready," I said, a calm determination in my voice. "This is just the beginning." Daniel spent the rest of the morning pacing the house, his face twisted in frustration. Every attempt to call me, text me, or even email me ended in silence. The control he had so smugly flaunted the night before was slipping away, and he didn't know how to stop it. But that was the point. I wanted him to feel powerless. Around noon, Daniel called his brother, Lucas, for help. "Rebecca's gone crazy," he shouted over the phone. "She's frozen the accounts, taken the car, and disappeared. I need her back here right now." Lucas sighed. "Honestly, Daniel, what did you expect? You announced your remarriage while she was sitting at the same table. Did you think she'd just take it lying down?" Daniel hung up angrily and decided to go straight to my parents' house, expecting them to side with him. He always thought he could charm his way through any situation. But when he arrived, my father, Robert, met him at the door with a cold glare. "Daniel," my father said firmly, "Rebecca has told us everything. Don't think for a second that will help you after what you've done." Daniel's jaw dropped. "But leave," my father interrupted, closing the door without another word. That afternoon, I received a call from my lawyer, Meredith, a sharp and confident woman in her 40s who had handled difficult cases like mine before. "Rebecca, I've filed the paperwork," Meredith said. "The divorce proceedings will begin next week, and with the financial records you provided, you'll come out of this clean. Daniel's about to face some serious consequences for his actions." I leaned back in my chair, letting out a breath of relief. "Thank you, Meredith. I can't wait to see his face when reality hits." By the evening, Daniel was desperate. He hadn't heard from me, his accounts were still frozen, and his family's patience was wearing thin. That's when he saw it, a notice from the bank, delivered to his inbox. It was a repayment demand for the joint mortgage I'd removed my name from earlier that morning. Without my income, he would be solely responsible for the payments, and the amount was staggering. His dream of a carefree remarriage was crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. He called me one last time. This time, his voice wasn't arrogant or dismissive, it was pleading. "Rebecca, please," he said. "Let's talk. We can work this out." I let his words hang in the air for a moment before replying. "You laughed at me, Daniel. You dragged me out of our home in front of your family. Now you want to talk. No, Daniel. You'll face this on your own. Goodbye." That night, I sat with Amanda, watching the sunset from her backyard. The relief of taking control of my life washed over me, and for the first time in years, I felt free. "Do you regret anything?" Amanda asked. "Not a thing," I said with a smile. Daniel wanted me to regret standing up for myself, but instead, he's the one drowning in regret. And with that, I closed a painful chapter of my life, ready to move forward on my own terms. Months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. The divorce was finalized, and as Meredith had predicted, I walked away with everything that was rightfully mine. Daniel, on the other hand, found himself buried under a mountain of debt. His remarriage plans? They fizzled out when his fiancée learned about his financial troubles. I moved into a charming new apartment downtown, a space that truly felt like mine. Every corner was filled with things that made me happy. Plants in every room, soft throws on the couches, and sunlight streaming through the large windows. It was a fresh start in every sense of the word. One day, while unpacking a box of old photographs, my phone buzzed. It was Amanda calling to invite me out for coffee. "You deserve to celebrate," she said as I sat down at our favorite cafe. "It's not every day someone walks away from such a toxic situation and rebuilds their life so beautifully." I smiled, sipping my coffee. "You're right. I'm proud of myself. For the first time, I feel like I'm truly in control." As we chatted, I realized how far I'd come. The humiliation I'd felt that night at the family dinner had been replaced with a quiet, confident strength. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Meanwhile, Daniel's life had taken a turn he hadn't expected. He lost the house after failing to keep up with the mortgage payments. His family, once so supportive of his actions, distanced themselves when they realized he had nothing to offer them anymore. Alone, and without the wealth he had flaunted for so long, Daniel finally understood the weight of my words. "You'll regret this a lot." As for me, I began to focus on my career and personal growth. I took on a new project at work, one that pushed me out of my comfort zone but reminded me of my capabilities. I also reconnected with old friends and hobbies I'd neglected during my marriage. Life felt full again, full of hope, opportunity, and happiness. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the city lights, I thought about the woman I had been before all this. Quiet, submissive, afraid to stand up for herself. She was gone now. In her place was someone stronger, someone who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to demand it. This wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the beginning of my life.
Starting today, my sister and her husband are moving in with us. Strangers should just go somewhere else. Suddenly, John and my sister-in-law's husband barged into our house and said, "Why do I have to leave this house? Because we can no longer live together as a married couple?" John claimed that I had been treating him like a maid all this time. In other words, "I've been a victim of your emotional abuse." "That's terrible, John," my sister-in-law exaggeratedly said, pretending to wipe away non-existent tears. "But I can't stand it anymore. I'm divorcing you. I'll be getting the property division first, this house. I endured that life for 2 years, so I have the right to it, don't I?" That's right. Who's going to pay the $3,300 living expenses? The next day, when I moved into a luxury facility worth $2 million, I got a barrage of calls from my hysterical husband and his sister. My name is Anna Smith, and I just turned 40 a little while ago. I'm a day trader and investor. I buy and sell currencies and stocks. Thanks to that, my job is going well, and I can say I have a decent amount of wealth. I have a congenital illness, which isn't particularly life-threatening, but the doctors advise me not to overdo it and not to have children if possible. Apparently, there's a significant risk associated with childbirth. My parents didn't hide this from me. They raised me to face my illness from a young age and to live my life with determination. My father, who worked at a brokerage firm, taught me about stocks, and thanks to him, I can now make a living from it. My husband's name is John. He's 30 years old, 10 years younger than me, and we've been married for 2 years. We met when John started working as a waiter at my favorite restaurant. I thought a cute guy had joined, but we were just staff and customer. That was it. But somehow, he got to me, and we went from friends to lovers, and before I knew it, we were thinking about marriage. I thought this couldn't go on. After all, I can't have children. John is still in his 20s. I couldn't marry him and make him give up the possibility of having his own children. So, I refused his proposal once. But then John said to me, "I want to live my life with you, Anna. That's why I proposed. If I wanted kids, I would have chosen someone else from the start. Don't you trust me?" I was so happy I cried and decided to accept his proposal. Right after we got married, John said, "I'll stay at home and take care of everything. I don't hate my job as a waiter, but wouldn't it be easier for you to work this way? You know I'm good at cooking." John is indeed good at cooking. He originally had an interest in food and got a job related to it. He wasn't in the kitchen, but he said he learned a lot by watching. That's how we first started talking. My brother works in the restaurant industry and told me he opened his own place, which piqued John's interest, and we had many conversations. At that time, John said he wanted to have his own place someday, so he asked me to share more stories. his eyes sparkling. Seeing those eyes, I thought it was nice. But when he said he'd be a stay-at-home husband, I asked what would happen to his dream. He replied, "Do you think being a stay-at-home husband means I can't have my own place? That's disrespectful to people who do housework full-time. That's old-fashioned thinking. Besides, wouldn't it be lonely if we were apart? I want to spend as much time with you as possible." When he said that so sweetly, I, being weak, agreed to his proposal. At first, things went really well with me working and John handling all the housework. But gradually, John stopped doing the chores. The living room, which once had that newlywed vibe, started getting cluttered with comic books and video games, and John began spending all night playing games in front of the big TV. At first, it was just occasionally, so I thought it was okay once in a while. But it got worse and worse, and soon he was living a completely reversed day-night schedule. "John, isn't this getting a bit out of hand lately?" "Yeah, sorry. I'm really into this game right now. Can you let it slide until I finish it, please?" he pleaded. I reluctantly agreed to let him finish that game, but before I knew it, he was hooked on a new game. The house was a mess. When we first got married, John used to clean meticulously, keeping the place comfortable. He was such a great stay-at-home husband. What happened? I put up with it for a few months, but one day I finally had to say something. "John, we need to talk." "Huh, what about?" "I married an adult man, but now it felt like dealing with an elementary school kid. It felt like I was a mom scolding her child to do their homework before playing games. We're supposed to be a married couple, equals. You're the one who wanted to be a stay-at-home husband, so I need you to keep that promise. I'm not saying you can't have fun, just finish your responsibilities first." I laid it all out, and John thought for a moment before saying, "Got it. I'm sorry I've been slacking. I'll play only after I finish my chores, I promise." True to his word, John went back to being the perfect stay-at-home husband, but there was a difference this time. He always seemed unhappy. In the beginning, he used to cook joyfully and proudly show off the clean house. Now he just rushed through his tasks and retreated to his room. He used to play games on the big living room TV and read comics on the sofa. But now he played online games in his own room, more and more. He started saying things like, "Sorry, I have a dungeon raid tonight. Can you eat by yourself? Just leave the dishes, I'll wash them later." I would watch him walk away to his room and eat dinner alone. No matter how good the food was, eating it alone like that made it taste less enjoyable. But since he was doing the housework as promised, I couldn't say anything. And it wasn't just dinner. "I have a guild battle tonight. Not sure when I'll be back. Go to bed without me." He wouldn't come back to the bedroom. It was like this almost every night. During the day, he'd go out alone. When I asked where he was going, he'd just say, "Shopping," and then not return until evening. Yet, he always made sure to prepare my meals and leave them ready. It felt like sarcasm. He did all the chores, cleaning, laundry, cooking. So, I couldn't complain, but this wasn't family life. It felt like having a live-in housekeeper. We barely spoke anymore. I just ate the prepared and cold meals alone, changed into the washed clothes, and sat in the cleaned house feeling lonely. In times like these, I thought being alone might be less lonely. Thinking this, I'd look at John's room door and cry from the sadness. Still, I kept hoping things would settle down. I believed we'd get back to normal eventually, so I silently endured. Then, after about a year of this lifestyle, John suddenly made an announcement. "Starting today, my sister and her husband are moving in with us." Strangers should just go somewhere else. Suddenly, John and my sister-in-law's husband barged into our house and said that. I couldn't understand it at all. I remembered hearing that when John got married and moved in here, his sister and her husband moved into an apartment. What, John? You're moving out and going back to the old apartment? In my confusion, I blurted that out, and the three of them looked at each other and burst out laughing. No, I'm staying here with my sister and her husband. You're the one who's moving out. I couldn't understand it at all. Why do I have to leave this house? Because we can no longer live together as a married couple, John claimed. You have been treating me like a maid all this time. In other words, I've been a victim of your emotional abuse. That's terrible, John, my sister-in-law exaggeratedly said, pretending to wipe away non-existent tears. But I can't stand it anymore. I'm divorcing you. I'll be getting property division first. This house. I endured that life for 2 years, so I have the right to it, don't I? That's right, John kept asserting, and his sister kept cheering him on. Meanwhile, her husband just stood there smirking at them. I started to understand what was going on. John must have planned this from the beginning. He sweet-talked me into marrying him and planned to divorce me at a convenient time. Just like he said earlier, he planned to get his hands on various things. I never planned on getting married. Knowing I couldn't have children and not being particularly attractive, my personality is just so-so. I didn't think any man would want to marry me. So, I decided to live alone, focusing on my work and hobbies. I had some friends and a normal relationship with my parents and brother. My parents moved to my dad's hometown after he retired, living there with my brother and his wife. My brother worked in the restaurant industry for a few. Starting today, my sister and her husband are moving in with us. Strangers should just go somewhere else. Suddenly, John and my sister-in-law's husband barged into our house and said, "Why do I have to leave this house? Because we can no longer live together as a married couple?" John claimed that I had been treating him like a maid all this time. In other words, I've been a victim of your emotional abuse. That's terrible, John, my sister-in-law exaggeratedly said, pretending to wipe away non-existent tears. But I can't stand it anymore. I'm divorcing you. I'll be getting the property division first, this house. I endured that life for 2 years, so I have the right to it, don't I? That's right. Who's going to pay the $3,300 living expenses? The next day, when I moved into a luxury facility worth $2 million, I got a barrage of calls from my hysterical husband and his sister. My name is Anna Smith, and I just turned 40 a little while ago. I'm a day trader and investor. I buy and sell currencies and stocks. Thanks to that, my job is going well, and I can say I have a decent amount of wealth. I have a congenital illness, which isn't particularly life-threatening, but the doctors advise me not to overdo it and not to have children if possible. Apparently, there's a significant risk associated with childbirth. My parents didn't hide this from me. They raised me to face my illness from a young age and to live my life with determination. My father, who worked at a brokerage firm, taught me about stocks, and thanks to him, I can now make a living from it. My husband's name is John. He's 30 years old, 10 years younger than me, and we've been married for 2 years. We met when John started working as a waiter at my favorite restaurant. I thought a cute guy had joined, but we were just staff and customer. That was it. But somehow, he got to me, and we went from friends to lovers. And before I knew it, we were thinking about marriage. I thought this couldn't go on. After all, I can't have children. John is still in his 20s. I couldn't marry him and make him give up the possibility of having his own children. So, I refused his proposal once. But then John said to me, "I want to live my life with you, Anna. That's why I proposed. If I wanted kids, I would have chosen someone else from the start. Don't you trust me?" I was so happy I cried and decided to accept his proposal. Right after we got married, John said, "I'll stay at home and take care of everything. I don't hate my job as a waiter, but wouldn't it be easier for you to work this way? You know I'm good at cooking." John is indeed good at cooking. He originally had an interest in food and got a job related to it. He wasn't in the kitchen, but he said he learned a lot by watching. That's how we first started talking. My brother works in the restaurant industry and told me he opened his own place, which piqued John's interest, and we had many conversations. At that time, John said he wanted to have his own place someday, so he asked me to share more stories, his eyes sparkling. Seeing those eyes, I thought it was nice. But when he said he'd be a stay-at-home husband, I asked what would happen to his dream. He replied, "Do you think being a stay-at-home husband means I can't have my own place? That's disrespectful to people who do housework full-time. That's old-fashioned thinking. Besides, wouldn't it be lonely if we were apart? I want to spend as much time with you as possible." When he said that so sweetly, I, being weak, agreed to his proposal. At first, things went really well with me working and John handling all the housework. But gradually, John stopped doing the chores. The living room, which once had that newlywed vibe, started getting cluttered with comic books and video games, and John began spending all night playing games in front of the big TV. At first, it was just occasionally, so I thought it was okay once in a while. But it got worse and worse, and soon he was living a completely reversed day-night schedule. "John, isn't this getting a bit out of hand lately?" "Yeah, sorry. I'm really into this game right now. Can you let it slide until I finish it, please?" he pleaded. I reluctantly agreed to let him finish that game, but before I knew it, he was hooked on a new game. The house was a mess. When we first got married, John used to clean meticulously, keeping the place comfortable. He was such a great stay-at-home husband. What happened? I put up with it for a few months, but one day I finally had to say something. "John, we need to talk." "Huh, what about?" "I married an adult man, but now it felt like dealing with an elementary school kid. It felt like I was a mom scolding her child to do their homework before playing games. We're supposed to be a married couple, equals. You're the one who wanted to be a stay-at-home husband, so I need you to keep that promise. I'm not saying you can't have fun, just finish your responsibilities first." I laid it all out, and John thought for a moment before saying, "Got it. I'm sorry I've been slacking. I'll play only after I finish my chores, I promise." True to his word, John went back to being the perfect stay-at-home husband, but there was a difference this time. He always seemed unhappy. In the beginning, he used to cook joyfully and proudly show off the clean house. Now he just rushed through his tasks and retreated to his room. He used to play games on the big living room TV and read comics on the sofa. But now he played online games in his own room, more and more. He started saying things like, "Sorry, I have a dungeon raid tonight. Can you eat by yourself? Just leave the dishes, I'll wash them later." I would watch him walk away to his room and eat dinner alone. No matter how good the food was, eating it alone like that made it taste less enjoyable. But since he was doing the housework as promised, I couldn't say anything. And it wasn't just dinner. "I have a guild battle tonight. Not sure when I'll be back. Go to bed without me." He wouldn't come back to the bedroom. It was like this almost every night. During the day, he'd go out alone. When I asked where he was going, he'd just say, shopping, and then not return until evening. Yet, he always made sure to prepare my meals and leave them ready. It felt like sarcasm. He did all the chores, cleaning, laundry, cooking. So, I couldn't complain, but this wasn't family life. It felt like having a live-in housekeeper. We barely spoke anymore. I just ate the prepared and cold meals alone, changed into the washed clothes, and sat in the cleaned house feeling lonely. In times like these, I thought being alone might be less lonely. Thinking this, I'd look at John's room door and cry from the sadness. Still, I kept hoping things would settle down. I believed we'd get back to normal eventually, so I silently endured. Then, after about a year of this lifestyle, John suddenly made an announcement. Starting today, my sister and her husband are moving in with us. Strangers should just go somewhere else. Suddenly, John and my sister-in-law's husband barged into our house and said that. I couldn't understand it at all. I remembered hearing that when John got married and moved in here, his sister and her husband moved into an apartment. What, John? You're moving out and going back to the old apartment? In my confusion, I blurted that out, and the three of them looked at each other and burst out laughing. No, I'm staying here with my sister and her husband. You're the one who's moving out. I couldn't understand it at all. Why do I have to leave this house? Because we can no longer live together as a married couple, John claimed. You have been treating me like a maid all this time. In other words, I've been a victim of your emotional abuse. That's terrible, John, my sister-in-law exaggeratedly said, pretending to wipe away non-existent tears. But I can't stand it anymore. I'm divorcing you. I'll be getting property division first, this house. I endured that life for 2 years, so I have the right to it, don't I? That's right, John kept asserting, and his sister kept cheering him on. Meanwhile, her husband just stood there smirking at them. I started to understand what was going on. John must have planned this from the beginning. He sweet-talked me into marrying him and planned to divorce me at a convenient time. Just like he said earlier, he planned to get his hands on various things. I never planned on getting married. Knowing I couldn't have children and not being particularly attractive, my personality is just so-so. I didn't think any man would want to marry me. So, I decided to live alone, focusing on my work and hobbies. I had some friends and a normal relationship with my parents and brother. My parents moved to my dad's hometown after he retired, living there with my brother and his wife. My brother worked in the restaurant industry for a few years, got married, and started a small restaurant with his wife. When choosing the location, he decided to live with our parents. The land is spacious, so they built a separate house on the property and lived together on the same premises. I was born and raised in this town close to the city, so it's not exactly like visiting home when I go there. But I enjoyed spending time with my parents, brother, sister-in-law, and my 2 nephews. I never felt lonely, so getting married to a man 10 years younger was a surprise even to me. In hindsight, I guess I was played. Listening to John and his sister, I couldn't help but laugh at my own foolishness. I had a feeling this might happen. John approached me so suddenly and got so deeply involved. It felt like a made-up story. At first, I was cautious, but his puppy-like affection won me over. I started thinking quickly. How can I turn the tables? How can I give these people a taste of their own medicine? As a day trader, my job is to read situations, anticipate the future, and turn things in a positive direction. I've been winning my whole life, so I can handle this too. No, I'll definitely handle it. As I kept my head down, John and his sister kept hurling insults at me. Hey, why are you so quiet? Hurry up and pack your things. Get ready to leave. For now, I'll act like I'm leaving the house. All right, I'll leave. I started packing only my personal belongings. All I needed was a change of clothes, my laptop for work, and a few other small items. Here, fill this out. John handed me a piece of paper. It was the divorce papers I'd heard about. The witness section had his sister's and her husband's names already filled in. I'll file the divorce papers. I'll contact you if I need anything else. With mocking smiles, John and the others watched as I left my own condo with my belongings. I had a place to go for now. I'll head there and think things over. I'm sure they'll have more to say soon enough, so I'll deal with it then. I drove out of the condo's parking lot and headed to my destination. Once I got there, I had a peaceful night's sleep and felt refreshed. I woke up later than usual and had brunch. The food here is always delicious. It was the first time I'd been here since getting married, so it had been over 2 years. First, I sent John a message on WhatsApp telling him my current location and that my lawyer would handle things from now on. The phone rang almost immediately, faster than I expected. What the hell is this about? I could hear John's sister yelling in the background, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. What do you mean? Don't play dumb. Where the hell are you? John reacted furiously. I came here because I was kicked out. Is that a problem? That's not what I mean. John's voice was filled with frustration. That's a high-end resort, a members-only hotel. Why are you there? Because I'm a member here. You never told me that. Of course not, because I never mentioned it. As John said, this is a very exclusive hotel, but it's not just a hotel. It's a luxury resort with lifetime care services. In other words, a high-end retirement facility. There's even a hospital next door. You can stay here as a resort guest or buy a place and live here like a regular home. Getting in requires at least $2 million, and it was quite the topic in the media for a while. That's probably why John recognized the name and called me immediately after checking. Why are you a member of a place like that? Because I paid for the rights to be here. On the other end of the line, J.N. made some incomprehensible noises. Someone mentioned I should go somewhere else, right? So I decided to live here. If you want to stay in the house, go ahead. Just make sure to pay the $3,300 monthly rent. What? But that's your house. What do you mean rent? I decided to sell it. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I won't be living there anymore. I never planned on getting married and bought this place to avoid burdening anyone in my old age. I had already purchased the condo I lived in until yesterday, but I knew I had to secure this spot quickly, as such prime facilities don't come up for sale often. I took the plunge. I plan to move in here when I am older. This place is a bit far from the city, so it felt too early to retire here completely while I could still work. I kept it as a vacation home. I visited occasionally to unwind, but kept it a secret from everyone. The only people who know are my accountant and lawyer. Give me that place, too. While I was deep in thought, J.N. suddenly said that I should be able to get half of that. How convenient for him. Who in their right mind?
I decided to file for divorce. My husband stormed out of the house, leaving behind our 3-year-old twins after his harsh words. And our newborn daughter. I had a hunch for some time that he was cheating, but between childcare and work, I had no energy to confront him. I can't do this anymore. Just then, one of the twins clung to me, saying, "Mommy, we love you." My beloved children looked up at me with worried faces. Despite my anger towards my husband, something clicked in me at that moment. I thought, well, I'll just file for divorce. I immediately signed the papers with a smirk. he doesn't realize how much I've been supporting him. Unknowingly, he had begun his descent into hell. Late again. How many times have I heard that? My name is Jennifer, and I'm 34. We got married 4 years ago, and he's 2 years younger than me, which led me to spoil him at first. The following year, we had twin girls, and 3 years later, another daughter. His return home started getting extremely late around the time our youngest was born. I hope the third one is a boy. I've always dreamed of playing catch with him. He was excited during the pregnancy, but his attitude soured as soon as he found out it was another girl. At the hospital, he grimaced when he saw our newborn daughter. She doesn't look like me. She's not cute, he said. At that moment, intense anger welled up inside me. How could he say his own child wasn't cute? Maybe he was already considering divorce by then. Even after I came home from the hospital, his sulkiness continued. He barely helped with child care. Show a little interest in the kids, I told him. If you're short on hands, hire a babysitter or something. You've got savings from your job. I worked at a top-tier company, earning significantly more than most women my age. On the other hand, my husband struggled to keep a job, often quitting before I even noticed. Perhaps he was envious of my success. At the time, he was doing temporary work with no certainty of how long it would last. I didn't expect financial support from him, but I wished he'd at least fulfill his role as a father. Spend time with the kids at night, at least. But his response was always, "What a hassle." When I asked him to help, he reluctantly did it, but so half-heartedly that the girls were bored. He seemed to notice their indifference, which he didn't like, leading to a terrible cycle. Eventually, he stopped helping altogether. "I'm tired from work. Let me rest on the weekends," he'd say. So on weekends, he either stayed in his room or went out. "I have to work this holiday. If you don't watch the kids, I have plans too. See you," he'd say, leaving without listening. I couldn't leave the kids alone, so I often had to scramble for a last-minute babysitter. If things continued this way, it would surely destroy our marriage and negatively affect our children. So, I decided to talk to my in-laws. The next day, I visited them. That's just how husbands are. A wife needs to be patient, they said. More importantly, could you do that thing we talked about last time? My concerns were ignored, and they asked for favors instead. My parents lived far away, so it was hard to meet them, and I felt guilty even calling. I didn't know who to turn to. "Hey, make dinner," my husband said, greeting me in pajamas when I got home that evening. The house was a mess, and the kids, bored with their toys, smiled when they saw me. "Where have you been all this time?" he asked. "I had to stop by the in-laws for a bit," I replied. "Hurry up and make dinner." "I'm starving," he said. "If you've been home all day, couldn't you do some laundry or clean the bathroom?" I asked, frustrated. He snorted in amusement. I decided not to do anything for someone who didn't appreciate it. "What do you mean?" "I cleaned the bathroom yesterday, and you didn't thank me." "Didn't I say thank you?" I asked. "Not that. I mean like at least $100, he said, stretching out his hand, asking for money. What was he talking about? I pulled him aside so the kids wouldn't hear and retorted, "I'm working, doing the chores, raising the kids, all of it, and you've never helped me." "That's a wife's job," he shot back. "Then what's your job?" "I work too," I said, knowing full well he barely earned $1,000 a month and did nothing around the house. Our argument lasted for an hour, until our daughter interrupted, "Mommy, I'm hungry." My husband stormed off, but I ignored him and rushed to prepare dinner. During those tense days, I discovered something devastating: my husband was cheating. I confided in a college friend who had divorced due to her husband's affairs. She advised me to gather evidence immediately. In truth, I had suspected the affair for some time, just before our youngest was born. He came home one day wearing a new perfume. When I casually asked him about it, he broke into a sweat and stuttered. His late nights, increasing silence, and cold attitude toward the children were all red flags. The final straw came when I found a lipstick in his jacket pocket. "It's mine." "My lips get chapped," he said, trying to brush it off. "You're using Chanel's pink lipstick?" I asked. "Maybe it's my mom's," he muttered. That night, I noticed a hickey on his neck, partially hidden by his shirt collar. I was about to confront him, but instead, I decided to gather evidence first. "Take your time warming up," I said with a smile, pretending I hadn't seen anything. The next day, after a late shift, I came home to find my daughters asleep and the house eerily quiet. In the dining room, my husband stood under the soft glow of the light, holding a piece of paper. "I can't take this anymore. Let's get a divorce." "What?" "Just file for divorce. I don't want the kids." Without waiting for my response, he handed me the divorce papers and left. "Mommy." The sound of the door closing woke up the twins, who looked at me with worried expressions. "It's okay." "Sorry for waking you," I told my daughters, trying to comfort them, but inside, it clearly wasn't okay. "He's reached his limit, that's my line." And what did he mean he doesn't want the kids? Mixed emotions swirled in my head, and I hadn't even noticed the tears streaming down my face. "Mommy, we love you," the twins said, sensing something was wrong, and they hugged me tightly. At that moment, I came to my senses. I can't go on like this. I can't worry these little girls. I realized that as long as I have my children, I'm happy, and this is what I should have done from the start. "Well, I'll just file it," I said with a weary look on my face. My daughters smiled, and we all slept soundly that night. The next day, I filed the divorce papers first thing in the morning and called a certain person. "Yes, please go ahead with it." "It's my husband who will have trouble," I said, my voice steady. The person on the phone listened to my story and took action. This was something I had considered before. If my husband betrayed me, I would end everything we had been doing. If that ruined his life, it was none of my business. 3 days later, I came home from work and found my in-laws and husband waiting for me. My mother-in-law was furious, my father-in-law looked pale, and my husband seemed clueless, dragged along without understanding the situation. "Have you been waiting at the front door all this time?" "That's kind of creepy," I remarked. "This is no time for that." "What is this?" My mother-in-law thrust a letter at me. "It's a notice from a lawyer." "I can see that much," I said calmly, as her face turned tomato red in anger. "I need to pick up my daughters, so excuse me." Ignoring their protests, I walked inside, but my furious in-laws followed me into the living room, insisting on a discussion. "Why would you suddenly send this?" "I don't understand," my mother-in-law shouted. "You would understand if you read the letter, wouldn't you?" I replied. "Using a lawyer. How cowardly," she snapped, despite her son being in the wrong. Her outrage was something else, mixed with irritation and confusion. Finally, my husband, who seemed to understand nothing, spoke up. "Are you upset because I divorced you? Filing some kind of complaint?" His parents looked at him, dumbfounded. Of course, he had no idea what I had done for them all these years. "Wait, what? I didn't hear about any divorce." "Is that why this is happening?" my father-in-law asked, shocked. Such a useless son. My husband, still clueless, looked confused. "What are you two so anxious for? You've ruined everything." "Wait, what are we even talking about?" he asked, as the conversation between them went nowhere. My mother-in-law slammed the table. "Why did you divorce Jennifer?" she demanded. My husband clammed up, uncomfortable under the pressure. Since the conversation was going nowhere, I decided to answer for him. He completely failed to fulfill his duties as a husband and father. "There you go again. I told you, that's just how men are," my mother-in-law said dismissively. "Right, so you would forgive your husband if he had an affair?" I asked. My mother-in-law froze, clearly not expecting to hear that her son had been unfaithful. My husband tried to interject, but a sharp glare from me shut him up. Then, oddly, my father-in-law started defending his son. "A man's affair is just a fling. It's not a problem. This is pointless. Please leave. Any further communication will need to go through my lawyer," I said firmly. "So, what are you talking to a lawyer for now?" "You agreed to the divorce, right?" my husband asked, confused, still clueless about the gravity of the situation. "Agreeing. I filed for divorce straight away." "Then what is all this about?" he asked, growing agitated. While arguing with my husband, my mother-in-law suddenly started crying loudly. "Paying $56,000 in one lump sum is impossible." "Wait, what large sum? What are you talking about? Who's paying whom?" my husband asked, even more confused. Finally, the moment had come. It was time for my husband to regret everything. I proudly revealed what I had kept hidden until now. Right after we got married 4 years ago, I was called to my in-laws' house alone. My mother-in-law said she had a serious matter to discuss. Nervous because she was his mother, I was prepared to help. However, I was completely unprepared for the shocking words that came out of her mouth. "I need $60,000, she said, leaving me utterly confused. As I hesitated, she bluntly asked about my salary. Unable to withstand the pressure, I admitted it was over $100,000, and her eyes lit up. Apparently, my father-in-law had gotten into horse racing, losing large amounts without ever winning and accumulating significant debt. Desperate to cover his losses, she pleaded with me for the $60,000, promising to pay it back. Feeling cornered, I couldn't say no. She repeatedly assured me that she would repay the money, but after 4 years, I had only received $4,000 back. There were times when she made small repayments, only to borrow again. Realizing that if I didn't take action, I might never recover the full amount, I hired a lawyer and filed a lump sum claim for the remaining $56,000. When my husband heard this, his jaw dropped, and I almost laughed. "But we said we'd pay you back little by little." "Why suddenly in full?" he asked, incredulous. "We're no longer family, so I thought I shouldn't hold back," I replied coolly. At this, my mother-in-law, with a screech like a banshee, turned her fury toward my husband. "It's your fault for cheating, so you should be the one to pay it back." "Huh? Why should I? We're not working anymore, and our pension won't cover it," he stammered. "If you want me to live in your parents' house, you'll do what I say," she demanded. There was no way he could repay $56,000 in one lump sum, especially since he was unemployed at the time. "I'll live at Brian's place, so I won't pay," he said nonchalantly. "That's the name of your affair partner?" I asked, growing more absurd by the second as I listened to their family quarrel. It was time to deliver the final blow. "Don't think it ends with $56,000. I'm demanding $20,000 each from you and your affair partner as compensation, plus child support, of course." "What? That's not fair." "I didn't cheat," he protested. "Had you forgotten so quickly about loudly declaring you'd live with Brian?" I said, sighing as I handed him a pile of photos I had prepared for this very moment. "Looking at these makes me sick," I added. The photos were from his social media, showing him kissing and embracing his affair partner, evidence that my lawyer confirmed would hold up in court. "Why do you have these?" my husband asked, panic creeping into his voice. A quick online search brought up your social media. It's amazing you thought it wouldn't be found, I said. My naive husband had been posting cheerful photos on a public setting, completely unaware of how visible they were. Even my in-laws gaped at him, dumbfounded. Please leave now. It's time to take the girls to daycare, I said firmly. At least don't demand compensation from Brian. What if she runs away? My husband pleaded. That's not my problem, I replied coldly. With no resolution in sight, I forcefully kicked them out of the house. Open the door. Help me. I didn't know about the debt. I could hear my husband yelling through the door for a while. I'm calling the police. I shouted, and the three of them eventually shrugged and left. A year has passed since then. After paying me the compensation, the affair partner disappeared, leaving my ex-husband to deal with the fallout. He now lives with his parents, who incessantly demand he cover the remaining $56,000. To make matters worse, he ended up borrowing from shady lenders. While he managed to pay off some of the debt quickly, he still owes $20,000 in compensation for the affair, plus $500 a month in child support. Now, he earns a daily wage doing manual labor from morning till night. The interest on his debt continues to balloon, and it's unlikely he'll ever pay it off in his lifetime, but that's none of my business. Mommy, we're going to be late, my daughters called out, pulling me out of my thoughts. Oops, it's time to take them to daycare. They're growing up healthy and strong, and that's all the happiness I need.